The train's whistle pierced the frozen December air like a dying animal's cry, and Catherine Thorne pressed her gloved hand against the frost-covered window, watching as the small Montana settlement came into view through the swirling snow. Her heart hammered against her ribs with such force she wondered if the woman sitting across from her could hear it. But the elderly passenger had long since fallen asleep, her head bobbing gently with the rhythm of the slowing locomotive. Catherine had left everything behind in Philadelphia, every familiar face and comfortable certainty, to marry a man she had never met. And now, as the train pulled into Hecla Station on this bitter winter evening in 1884, she questioned every decision that had brought her to this moment. The screech of brakes announced their arrival, and Catherine gathered her worn carpetbag and the small trunk that contained all her worldly possessions. Her fingers trembled as she fastened the buttons on her dark blue traveling coat, knowing it would provide little protection against the Montana winter that waited beyond the train car's relative warmth. She had sewn this coat herself 3 years ago, back when her father was still alive and her future had seemed secure, before the fever had taken him and left her alone with debts she could never hope to repay. The mail-order bride agency had seemed like her only option, a lifeline thrown across the country to a desperate woman with no other prospects. The conductor helped her down the steps, and her boots met the snow-covered platform with a soft crunch. Cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and bringing tears to her eyes that had nothing to do with emotion. The wind howled between the buildings that lined the main street, carrying with it tiny ice crystals that stung her exposed skin. She stood there, alone on the platform as the train pulled away behind her, watching as the few other passengers who had disembarked hurried toward waiting wagons or into the warmth of the nearby hotel. The snow fell thick and fast, already accumulating on her shoulders and the brim of her bonnet. Catherine scanned the platform for the man who was supposed to meet her, a Mr. Herbert Winston, who had written her 3 formal letters describing his dry goods store and his need for a wife to help manage his household. His letters had been practical and impersonal, outlining what he could offer her in exchange for her domestic skills and companionship. She had responded with equal formality, sending him the photograph he had requested and a list of her qualifications as a housekeeper and cook. It had all been arranged through correspondence, a business transaction dressed up in the language of matrimony. But the platform was empty except for a tall figure standing near the far end, partially obscured by the falling snow. As she watched, the man moved toward her with long, purposeful strides, and Catherine felt her stomach clench with apprehension. Even from a distance, she could tell this was not the portly, middle-aged shopkeeper whose photograph she carried in her reticule. This man was younger, broader in the shoulders, and moved with an easy grace that spoke of physical labor rather than time spent behind a store counter. He stopped a few feet away, and Catherine found herself looking up into a face that was all hard angles and weathered skin, with eyes the color of storm clouds beneath the brim of a well-worn Stetson. Snow had collected on his shoulders and the front of his heavy sheepskin coat, and his breath came out in white clouds in the frigid air. He held his hat in his hands despite the cold, a gesture of respect that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. "Miss Catherine Thorne." His voice was deep and rough around the edges, but not unkind. "Yes." Her own voice came out barely above a whisper, and she cleared her throat to try again. "Yes, I am. Are you Mr. Winston's representative?" Something flickered across his face, an emotion she could not quite read in the failing light and falling snow. "I am Samuel Wright. I have a ranch about 5 miles north of here." He paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. "Herbert Winston died 2 weeks ago." Hart gave out while he was closing up his store one evening. The words hit Catherine with the force of a physical blow, and she swayed on her feet. The man, Samuel Wright, reached out to steady her, his hand firm on her elbow even through the thick fabric of her coat. Dead. Her intended husband was dead, and she was stranded in a Montana settlement she had never heard of until 3 months ago, with barely enough money to buy a meal, let alone a train ticket back east. The platform seemed to tilt beneath her feet, and black spots danced at the edges of her vision. "Easy now." Samuel's voice came from somewhere far away. "When did you last eat?" Catherine tried to remember and could not. She had been too nervous that morning to take breakfast, and the nausea of anxiety had killed any appetite she might have had for the meager lunch she had packed for the journey. "I am not certain," she admitted, hating how weak she sounded. "Come on then." His hand moved from her elbow to the small of her back, a proprietary gesture that should have offended her but instead felt steadying. "My wagon is just over here. We will get you somewhere warm and get some food into you before we figure out what comes next." "I cannot impose on a stranger," Catherine protested, even as her feet moved in the direction he was guiding her. "I will find a hotel, and tomorrow I will make arrangements to return east." "The hotel burned down last month," Samuel said matter-of-factly. "And the next train east does not come through for another 3 days. You can stay at my ranch tonight, and we will sort everything else out once you have warmed up and eaten something." He picked up her trunk as though it weighed nothing, and started toward a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses at the edge of the platform. Catherine wanted to argue, to maintain some shred of the propriety and independence she had been raised to value, but the cold was seeping through her coat, and the reality of her situation was beginning to settle over her like a suffocating blanket. She had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. This stranger, this Samuel Wright with his storm cloud eyes and gentle hands, was offering her shelter from the literal and metaphorical cold, and she had no choice but to accept. He helped her up onto the wagon seat and then climbed up beside her, taking up the reins with confident hands. Before setting the horses in motion, he reached behind the seat and pulled out a thick wool blanket, which he draped around her shoulders. "It is a cold ride out to the ranch," he said. "This should help some." The wagon lurched forward, and Catherine clutched the edge of the seat to steady herself. The snow was coming down harder now, and the wind had picked up, turning the late afternoon into an early twilight. She could barely see the buildings they passed as they left the small settlement behind, just dark shapes against the white curtain of the storm. Beside her, Samuel seemed completely unfazed by the weather, guiding the horses with steady hands along a road that Catherine could not even see beneath the accumulating snow. "How did you know I was arriving today?" she finally asked, her curiosity overcoming her discomfort with the situation. "Herbert's sister, Mrs. Patterson, asked me to meet you," Samuel replied, his eyes never leaving the road ahead. "She is the one who has been managing his affairs since he passed. She thought it would be better if someone told you in person rather than just leaving you to arrive and find out on your own." That was kind of her. Catherine pulled the blanket tighter around herself, but the cold seemed to have settled into her bones. "And kind of you to come out in this weather." Samuel glanced at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Could not let you stand there alone in the snow," he said simply. "Would not be right." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the crunch of the wagon wheels through the snow and the steady breathing of the horses. Catherine tried to process what had happened, to think through her options, but her mind felt as frozen as her fingers. She had spent everything she had on the train ticket west, selling her mother's jewelry, and the few pieces of furniture her father's creditors had not claimed. There was nothing waiting for her back in Philadelphia except more debt and the certainty of poverty. But what was waiting for her here? She knew nothing about this place, nothing about the people, and nothing about how she would survive. "I can see your mind working," Samuel said suddenly, startling her from her thoughts. "You are trying to figure out what you are going to do. Is it that obvious? You have the look of someone solving a difficult problem." He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I have a proposal for you if you are willing to hear it." Catherine turned to look at him fully for the first time since they had left town. In profile, his face was all strong lines and sharp angles, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. He was younger than she had first thought, probably no more than 30, and there was something in the set of his shoulders that spoke of loneliness and long days of hard work. "I am listening," she said carefully. "My ranch is a good one, but it is a lot for one man to manage alone," he began, his words coming slowly as though he was choosing each one with care. "I have been looking for a wife for the better part of a year now, but there are not many unmarried women out here, and those that are have their pick of suitors. I was actually considering placing my own advertisement with the mail-order bride agency when Herbert told me he was sending for you." Catherine felt her cheeks flush despite the cold. "Are you suggesting that I marry you instead?" "I am suggesting that you consider it." He still did not look at her, keeping his attention on the horses and the barely visible road. "I can offer you a good home, a warm place to sleep, and enough food that you will never go hungry. I am not a wealthy man, but I do well enough. The ranch has been in my family for 15 years and the herd is strong. In return, I would ask for your help managing the household and whatever other assistance you might be willing to provide." "You know nothing about me," Catherine pointed out, her voice barely audible over the wind. "I could be a terrible cook or a lazy housekeeper. I could have any number of terrible qualities that you would regret within a week." Now he did turn to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her heart skip a beat. "Herbert wrote to me about you. He was excited in his own quiet way to have you coming. He said you were educated and capable, that you had kept house for your father and managed his household accounts after your mother passed. He said you were honest in your letters and practical in your expectations. That is good enough for me." The wagon hit a rut in the road, and Catherine was thrown against Samuel's side. His arm came around her instinctively, steadying her, and for a moment they sat pressed together, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body through their layers of clothing. He smelled of wood smoke and leather, and something else she could not quite identify, something clean and masculine that made her pulse quicken in a way that was entirely inappropriate given their circumstances. "I apologize," she said, pulling away as soon as she had regained her balance. "I did not mean to, nothing to apologize for." His arm dropped away, but she could still feel the ghost of his touch. "These roads are rough even in good weather." They continued in silence, and Catherine tried to organize her chaotic thoughts. The rational part of her mind insisted that marrying a complete stranger was madness, that she should find some other solution to her predicament. But what other solution was there? She had no money, no prospects, and no way to return east even if she wanted to. At least Samuel Wright was offering her an honest arrangement, a business transaction like the one she had agreed to with Herbert Winston. And there was something about him, something in the way he had steadied her on the platform and draped the blanket around her shoulders, that made her think he might be a decent man despite his rough edges. "If I were to agree," she said finally, "what would be the terms?" "Terms?" He sounded surprised, as though he had not expected her to consider his proposal seriously. "Yes, terms." Catherine turned to face him, drawing on the same steel that had carried her through her father's death, and the sale of everything she had ever known. "You said this would be a business arrangement. I want to know exactly what you expect from me and what I can expect from you in return." A slow smile spread across Samuel's face, the first real expression she had seen from him. "You are a practical woman. I like that." He was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I would expect you to manage the household, to cook and clean and help with the garden in the spring. If you are willing, I would appreciate help with the ranch accounts, as numbers have never been my strong suit. Beyond that, I would expect you to be my wife in all ways, though I would not rush you into the marriage bed if you needed time to adjust to our arrangement." Catherine felt her face flame at his frank discussion of such intimate matters, but she appreciated his directness. "And what would you provide in return? A home, food, clothing, whatever you need or want within reason. I would treat you with respect and expect the same in return. Any children we might have would be raised together, with both of us having a say in their upbringing. You would be my partner, not my servant." He paused and then added, "And I would keep you warm, Catherine Thorne. Through every winter and every storm, I would make sure you never felt cold or alone again." The words should have sounded ridiculous, a romantic promise from a man who claimed to be practical and businesslike. But something in the way he said them, with quiet certainty rather than flowery passion, made Catherine believe he meant every word. She thought about the cold, empty rooms of the Philadelphia boarding house, where she had spent her final weeks in the East, about the loneliness that had haunted her since her father's death. She thought about the future that awaited her if she refused this offer, a future of uncertainty and poverty and the constant fear of what each new day might bring. "I will need time to think about it," she said finally. "Of course." Samuel nodded, as though this was exactly the answer he had expected. "Stay at the ranch tonight, maybe a few days if you need to. Get your bearings and see what you think of the place. If you decide it is not for you, I will take you back to town and help you figure out another solution." The snow was falling so thickly now that Catherine could barely see 5 feet ahead of the horses. She marveled at Samuel's ability to navigate in these conditions, wondered how he could possibly know where he was going when everything looked the same in every direction. But he seemed completely confident, guiding the horses with steady hands and occasionally murmuring encouragements that the animals seemed to understand. "How much farther?" she asked, as much to break the silence as out of genuine curiosity. "Another mile or so. We will be there before full dark, if this snow does not get any worse." As if in response to his words, a gust of wind hit them broadside, strong enough to rock the wagon and send snow swirling around them in blinding eddies. Samuel cursed under his breath and pulled the horses to a stop. "Cannot see a damned thing in this. We are going to have to wait it out for a few minutes." He climbed down from the wagon seat and came around to her side, reaching up to help her down. "There is a small shelter just off the road here, built for situations exactly like this. Come on, before we both freeze solid." Catherine took his offered hand and climbed down, nearly losing her footing in the deep snow. Samuel caught her easily, and then he was leading her through the storm, one arm around her waist to keep her from getting separated in the whiteout conditions. She could see nothing, could barely breathe through the snow and wind that battered her face, and she clung to Samuel's solid presence like a lifeline. Then they were stepping into sudden stillness, and Catherine realized they had reached the shelter he had mentioned. It was barely more than a lean-to, 3 walls and a roof constructed of rough-hewn logs, but it blocked the worst of the wind and snow. Samuel guided her to sit on a bench along one wall and then went back out into the storm, returning a moment later with the blanket from the wagon and what looked like a small pack. "The horses will be fine," he said, apparently reading the concern on her face. They know to stand with their backs to the wind and wait. I have been through worse storms than this with them. He sat down beside her on the bench, closer than propriety would normally allow but necessary for shared warmth in the bitter cold. From the pack, he produced a tin canteen and a small wrapped bundle. "Water and some dried meat," he said, offering both to her. "Not much of a meal, but it is better than nothing." Catherine accepted gratefully, realizing as she took her first sip of water how thirsty she was. The dried meat was tough and salty, but she chewed it slowly, savoring the simple act of eating. Beside her, Samuel did the same, and for a few minutes they sat in companionable silence while the storm raged just beyond their small shelter. "You get storms like this often?" Catherine asked finally. "Often enough," Samuel replied. "Montana winters are not for the faint of heart. It can be hard living out here, especially for someone not used to the isolation and the cold." He glanced at her, and there was something almost apologetic in his expression. "I want you to know what you would be getting into if you agreed to my proposal. It is not an easy life." "I did not come west expecting an easy life," Catherine said quietly. "I came because I had no other choice. My father's death left me with nothing but debts and the clothes on my back. I sold everything I had to pay for the train ticket Herbert Winston sent. I knew I would be marrying a stranger and moving to a place I had never seen, and I made my peace with that. At least you are being honest with me about what to expect." Samuel studied her face in the dim light filtering through the shelter's opening. "You are braver than you think," he said. "Leaving everything you know, traveling across the country alone, that takes courage, or desperation," Catherine replied with a bitter laugh. "Sometimes they are the same thing." He shifted on the bench, and his shoulder pressed against hers. The contact should have been uncomfortable, but instead, Catherine found herself leaning into his warmth, drawn to the solid strength of him in a way that both comforted and confused her. "My parents came out here in '69, Samuel continued, his voice taking on a distant quality. "My father wanted land of his own, wanted to build something that would last. My mother followed him because she loved him, even though I think she was terrified of leaving her family back in Ohio. They built the ranch from nothing, survived drought and harsh winters and all the dangers that come with this country. I was just a boy, but I remember how hard it was, how many times we almost lost everything." "What happened to them?" Catherine asked softly. "Influenza, 6 years back." They went within days of each other, as though neither wanted to go on without the other. There was grief in his voice, old and worn but still present. "I have been running the ranch alone since then, and some days it feels like I am drowning in all the work that needs doing. That is why I need a wife, not just for companionship but for partnership. I need someone who can share the load, who can stand beside me when things get difficult." "That is what Herbert Winston wanted as well," Catherine said. "His letters were very clear that he needed a helpmate, not a romantic companion." "Is that what you want?" Samuel's question was direct, and Catherine found herself struggling to answer. "I do not know what I want anymore," she admitted. "I used to think I knew when I was younger. I thought I would marry someone from a good Philadelphia family, someone my father approved of, and I would manage his household and raise his children and live a comfortable, predictable life. But my father never had the connections he thought he did, and the men he introduced me to were not interested in a woman with no dowry and no prospects. By the time he died, I was 23 and firmly on the shelf, too old to be considered desirable and too poor to make up for it with material advantages." "You are not old," Samuel said firmly, "and any man who could not see your worth was a fool." The simple conviction in his words made Catherine's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "You do not even know me." "I know enough." His hand found hers in the space between them, his rough fingers closing around her smaller, softer ones. I know you are brave enough to cross the country alone. I know you are practical enough to discuss terms rather than dissolving into tears when your plans fell apart. I know you are strong enough to survive losses that would have broken someone else. That is enough for me to know you would make a good wife and a good partner. Catherine looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between his sun-browned skin and her winter-pale fingers. She should pull away, should maintain proper distance with this man she had only just met. But the warmth of his touch was spreading through her, melting something that had been frozen inside her chest since long before she had stepped onto that train in Philadelphia. "I barely know you," she whispered. "Then let us change that." Samuel shifted to face her more fully, though he did not release her hand. "I am 31 years old, born in Ohio but raised right here in Montana. I run 200 head of cattle and 20 horses on 1,500 acres of land. I do not drink to excess. I do not gamble, and I have never raised my hand to a woman or child. I go to church when the circuit preacher comes through, though I will admit I am not as devout as I probably should be. I can read and write well enough, though I never had much formal schooling. My favorite meal is roast chicken with potatoes, and I have a weakness for apple pie that borders on sinful. I snore sometimes, or so I have been told, and I am not always the most talkative companion, especially when I am tired. But I am honest and hardworking, and I would never lie to you or break a promise I made to you. That is who I am, for better or worse." The recitation was so earnest, so clearly rehearsed in his mind before he spoke it aloud, that Catherine felt a smile tugging at her lips despite everything. "I am 26 years old, born and raised in Philadelphia until 2 days ago. I am a good cook and a capable housekeeper, though I have never managed anything as large as a ranch. I am educated. My father believed strongly in teaching me to read and write and do figures, but I have no practical skills beyond managing a household. I have never been on a horse, I know nothing about cattle, and I have never experienced a winter like the one we are having right now. I can be stubborn when I think I am right, and I have been told I have too many opinions for a woman. I love to read, though I have had to sell most of my books. I make a very good apple pie if I have the proper ingredients. And I am more frightened right now than I have ever been in my life, but I am trying very hard not to show it." Samuel's hand tightened around hers. "You do not have to hide your fear from me. God knows I am frightened half the time myself, wondering if I am going to be able to keep the ranch going, if I am going to lose everything my parents built. Fear just means you are smart enough to understand the risks. It does not make you weak." Outside, the wind was beginning to die down, and through the opening of the shelter Catherine could see that the snow was falling less heavily. The worst of the storm seemed to be passing, at least for the moment. Samuel noticed it too, and he stood, still holding her hand to help her rise as well. "We should get moving while we can," he said. "The ranch is not far now, and I want to get you inside before another squall hits." They made their way back to the wagon, and Samuel helped her up onto the seat before checking on the horses. True to his word, the animals had weathered the storm without incident, standing patiently with snow accumulated on their backs and their breath coming out in great white clouds. He brushed the worst of the snow off them and then climbed up beside Catherine, taking up the reins once more. The landscape that emerged as the snow cleared was breathtaking in its harsh beauty. Rolling hills stretched out in every direction, covered in a blanket of white that gleamed in the fading light. The sky was beginning to clear in the west, and fingers of orange and pink stretched across the horizon as the sun set behind distant mountains. Catherine had never seen anything like it. this vast emptiness so different from the crowded streets and tall buildings of Philadelphia. "There," Samuel said, pointing ahead. "That is home." Catherine followed his gaze and saw a cluster of buildings nestled in a small valley between two hills. The main house was a solid, two-story structure built of logs and stone, with smoke rising from two chimneys. Around it were several smaller buildings that she assumed were barns and storage sheds, all arranged in a neat semicircle. As they drew closer, she could see that the property was well maintained, the fences sturdy and the buildings in good repair. It spoke of care and attention, of someone who took pride in what they had built. Samuel guided the wagon into a covered area between the house and the largest barn, finally giving them shelter from the snow that had begun falling again. He jumped down and came around to help Catherine, his hands spanning her waist as he lifted her down from the high seat. For just a moment, she was pressed against him, close enough to see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes and the lines that fanned out from their corners, carved there by years of squinting into the sun and wind. "Welcome to the Wright Ranch," he said softly, and then he was stepping back, putting proper distance between them. "Let us get you inside and warmed up." The interior of the house was dim and cool, but Catherine could immediately see evidence of the work Samuel had put into maintaining it. The floors were swept clean, and the furniture, though simple, was well made and carefully arranged. He led her into a large room that served as both kitchen and living area, with a massive stone fireplace dominating one wall. A fire was burning low in the grate, and Samuel immediately moved to build it up, adding logs until the flames leaped high and heat began to fill the space. "Sit," he instructed, pointing to a chair near the fire. "I will bring in your trunk and then make us something hot to eat." Catherine wanted to protest that she should be the one cooking, that this was the kind of work she had come west to do. But exhaustion was catching up with her now that they were finally out of the cold. She sank into the chair gratefully and watched as Samuel moved around the kitchen with surprising efficiency for a man living alone. He filled a kettle with water from a pump at the sink and set it on the stove to heat, then began pulling out ingredients for a simple meal. "I am not much of a cook," he admitted as he worked, "but I can manage the basics. Tonight it will be bacon and beans and some bread I bought from Mrs. Patterson in town yesterday. Not fancy, but it will fill your stomach." "It sounds perfect," Catherine said honestly. Her stomach was growling at the mere mention of food, reminding her how little she had eaten in the past 2 days. As Samuel cooked, Catherine took the opportunity to study the room more carefully. The walls were lined with shelves holding dishes and cooking implements, all organized with military precision. A large wooden table dominated the center of the space, its surface scarred and worn from years of use. Through an open doorway, she could see a narrow hallway that presumably led to the bedrooms. Everything was clean and functional, but there was a starkness to it, an absence of the small touches that made a house a home. No curtains on the windows, no decorative items on the shelves, no sign that a woman had ever lived here. "My mother's things are packed away upstairs," Samuel said, apparently noticing the direction of her gaze. "I could not bring myself to get rid of them, but I also could not bear to see them every day after she was gone. If you decide to stay, you are welcome to use anything of hers that you might need." "That is generous of you," Catherine said softly. He shrugged, flipping the bacon in the pan. "They are just things." She would have wanted them used rather than gathering dust in a trunk. They ate in relative silence, both of them too hungry and tired for extensive conversation. The food was simple but well prepared, and Catherine felt strength returning to her body with each bite. Samuel poured them both coffee from a pot that had been keeping warm on the back of the stove, and Catherine wrapped her hands around the cup, savoring the warmth that seeped into her fingers. "There are 2 bedrooms upstairs," Samuel said when they had finished eating. "You can take the larger one. It has a better mattress and a small stove for heat. I will sleep in the other room tonight, and for as many nights as you are here." He paused, then added, "If you decide to marry me, we can discuss sleeping arrangements then. But while you are my guest, you will have complete privacy and safety." The careful way he said it, the deliberate reassurance, made Catherine realize he understood how vulnerable her position was. She was alone in the house of a strange man, with no one to turn to if he decided to take advantage of her. The fact that he was addressing this directly, promising her safety without making her ask for it, spoke volumes about his character. "Thank you," she said. "That means more to me than you might realize." He stood and began clearing the dishes, waving her away when she moved to help. "You have been traveling for days and had a shock today. Rest is what you need right now, not more work. Go on upstairs. The bedroom is the first door on the right. I will bring up your trunk and some hot water for washing." Catherine climbed the steep stairs, her legs heavy with exhaustion. The bedroom was exactly as Samuel had described. A simple space with a large bed covered in quilts, a small dresser, and a compact stove that was already lit and throwing off heat. The window looked out over the front of the property, and Catherine could see the snow still falling steadily, adding to the accumulation that now covered everything in sight. A soft knock at the door announced Samuel's arrival with her trunk, which he set down just inside the room. He was followed by a second trip carrying a large pitcher of hot water and a basin. "There are extra quilts in the chest at the foot of the bed if you get cold during the night," he said. "And if you need anything, I am just across the hall." "Thank you for everything," Catherine said, and she meant it. "You did not have to help me, but you did, and I am grateful." Samuel paused in the doorway, his hand on the frame. "Get some rest, Catherine Thorne. Things will look clearer in the morning after you have had a chance to sleep and think." Then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him and leaving her alone with her thoughts. Catherine changed into her nightgown, shivering in the cold air despite the heat from the stove. She washed quickly with the hot water Samuel had provided, scrubbing away the grime of travel and feeling more human as she did so. Then she climbed into the bed, burrowing under the heavy quilts, and let her mind wander over everything that had happened since she had stepped off that train. Herbert Winston was dead, and with him any certainty about her future. She was stranded in a place she did not know, dependent on the kindness of a stranger who had offered her a solution to her problems in the form of a marriage proposal. Samuel Wright seemed like a good man, honest and hardworking and considerate in ways that surprised her. But was that enough? Could she really marry someone she had only just met, tie her life to his without knowing what kind of husband he would be? As she drifted toward sleep, Catherine thought about Samuel's promise to keep her warm. It should have seemed like an empty romantic gesture, the kind of thing any man might say to a woman he was trying to court. But something about the way he had said it, with quiet conviction rather than flowery poetry, made her believe he had meant it literally. He would keep her warm, he would keep her safe, he would give her a place to belong in this harsh and beautiful country. Was that enough? Could affection and respect grow from such practical beginnings into something more? She did not have answers. But as the warmth of the bed seeped into her bones and exhaustion pulled her under, Catherine found herself hoping that maybe, just maybe, it could be. Morning came gray and cold, with snow still falling outside the window. Catherine woke slowly, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, and it took her a moment to remember where she was and how she had gotten here. The little stove had gone out during the night, and the room was frigid enough that she could see her breath. She dressed quickly in the warmest clothing she had, layering her wool dress over a flannel petticoat and wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. The smell of coffee and frying bacon drew her downstairs, where she found Samuel already up and cooking breakfast. He looked up as she entered, and something in his expression softened when he saw her. "Good morning. I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks, actually," Catherine admitted. "That bed is more comfortable than anywhere I have slept in a very long time." "Glad to hear it." He gestured to the table. "Sit down and I will get you some coffee. Breakfast will be ready in a few minutes." This time, Catherine did not argue. She watched as he moved around the kitchen, noting the competence with which he handled the cooking despite his claims of limited skill. The bacon was crisp but not burned, the eggs fried to perfection, and the biscuits he pulled from the oven were golden brown and steaming. "You are better at this than you led me to believe," she observed as they ate. Samuel looked almost embarrassed. "I have had 6 years of practice." "You learn quickly when the alternative is going hungry." He paused, then added, "But I would not mind having someone else take over the cooking if that person were inclined. I can do it, but I do not particularly enjoy it." "I do enjoy it," Catherine said. "Or at least, I used to. My mother taught me before she died, and I found I had a talent for it. My father always said my cooking was the one thing that made coming home worthwhile after my mother was gone." They fell into conversation more easily than Catherine would have thought possible, talking about small things, ordinary things. Samuel told her about the ranch, about the rhythms of the year and the work that needed doing in each season. Catherine found herself telling him about Philadelphia, about the life she had left behind, and the circumstances that had driven her west. It felt strange to be so open with a man she barely knew, but there was something about Samuel's quiet attention that made it easy to talk to him. After breakfast, Samuel stood and stretched. "I need to go check on the cattle and make sure they weathered the storm all right. Would you like to come with me? I can show you around the property, give you a sense of what the ranch is like." Catherine hesitated, glancing at the window where snow was still falling steadily. "Is it safe to go out in this weather? The worst of it has passed. This is just light snow, nothing like last night." He pulled on his heavy coat and handed her a spare that had been hanging by the door. "It will be big on you, but it is warmer than what you have. And I will get you some proper boots before we go out." The coat swallowed her, the hem nearly dragging on the ground and the sleeves hanging well past her fingertips, but it was indeed warmer than anything she owned. Samuel produced a pair of boots that were only slightly too large and helped her lace them tight. Then he led her outside into the winter morning. The world was transformed by snow, everything covered in a blanket of white that sparkled in the weak morning light. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, but there was something exhilarating about it too, a clarity and cleanness that made Catherine feel more awake than she had in months. Samuel led her toward the largest barn, pointing out the various buildings as they went. "That is the calving barn where we bring the cows when they are ready to give birth," he said, gesturing to a long, low structure. "The big barn there is for the horses and for storing hay. The smaller building is where I keep tools and tack, and that last one is the smokehouse. In the summer, there is a large garden behind the house, and my mother used to keep chickens, though I have not bothered with them since she passed. Inside the big barn, it was warmer and smelled of hay and horses." Catherine counted 8 animals in the stalls, all of them turning to watch as Samuel and Catherine entered. He moved from stall to stall, checking each horse carefully, running his hands over their legs and examining their hooves with practiced ease. Catherine stayed near the door, unsure of how to interact with the large animals but fascinated by the gentle way Samuel handled them. "This is Belle," he said, stopping at a stall that held a smaller horse, a pretty chestnut mare with a white blaze on her face. "She is the gentlest of the bunch, good for someone who has never ridden before. If you decided to stay, I could teach you to ride. It is the only practical way to get around out here, especially in good weather when the distances do not seem so daunting." "She is beautiful," Catherine said, taking a tentative step closer. Belle stretched her neck over the stall door and Catherine reached out to touch her nose, surprised by how soft it was. "She likes you," Samuel observed with a smile. "Horses are good judges of character, I have always thought." They spent the next hour touring the rest of the property, and with each step, Catherine could see how much work went into maintaining the ranch. Samuel showed her the cattle, hardy beasts with thick coats that made them look even larger than they were, gathered in a sheltered area near the creek that ran through the property. He explained how he had to break through the ice each morning so they could drink, how he had to distribute hay to supplement the grass they could no longer reach beneath the snow. The work was endless and physically demanding, and Catherine marveled that he managed it all alone. "I hire help in the summer," he explained as they walked back toward the house. "A couple of young men from town who are looking to earn some money, but in the winter, it is just me. That is part of why I need a wife, someone who can help shoulder some of the burden. Between the two of us, we could manage better than I have been managing alone." Back inside the warm house, Catherine helped Samuel prepare a simple midday meal of bread and cheese and leftover bacon. As they worked side by side in the kitchen, she found herself imagining what it might be like to do this every day, to share this space and this life with him. The thought should have been frightening, but instead she found it oddly comforting. "What are you thinking?" Samuel asked, catching her staring off into space. Catherine set down the knife she had been using to slice bread and turned to face him. "I am thinking that I would like to accept your proposal," she said, the words coming out in a rush before she could second-guess herself. "If the offer is still open, I would like to marry you and stay here at the ranch." Samuel went very still, his expression unreadable. "Are you certain? I do not want you to feel pressured because you have no other options." "If you need more time to think—" "I have done nothing but think since last night," Catherine interrupted. "And the truth is, I do not have other options, but that is not why I am saying yes. I am saying yes because I think we could make a good partnership, you and I. I think we could build something here together, something that would be worth all the hard work and uncertainty. You have been honest with me, more honest than Herbert Winston ever was in his letters, and I appreciate that. I think you are a good man, Samuel Wright, and I would like the chance to be your wife." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, transforming his stern features into something warm and almost boyish. "Then I would be honored to have you as my wife, Catherine Thorne." He crossed the space between them in 2 long strides and took both her hands in his. "I promise you, I will do everything in my power to make sure you never regret this decision. I will keep you safe and warm and cared for, and I will work every day to be worthy of the trust you are placing in me." "When?" Catherine asked, suddenly feeling shy now that the decision had been made. "When should we marry?" "The circuit preacher comes through every 2 weeks, but he was just here 3 days ago," Samuel said. "Which means he will not be back for another 11 days. Unless you want to wait longer." "No," Catherine said quickly. "I think sooner is better than later. It will give us both time to adjust before spring comes and the work gets even harder." Samuel nodded, and Catherine could see relief in his expression. 11 days, then. That will give you time to settle in, to go through my mother's things and see if there is anything you want to use. And it will give us time to get to know each other a bit better before we take our vows." The next 11 days passed in a blur of activity and growing familiarity. True to his word, Samuel gave Catherine complete freedom to go through his mother's belongings, and she found trunks full of clothes and household items that had been carefully preserved. She altered several dresses to fit her smaller frame, grateful for the practical calico and wool fabrics that were so much more suitable for ranch life than the fine but impractical dresses she had brought from Philadelphia. Samuel was true to his word in other ways as well. He was unfailingly respectful, never pushing for more intimacy than Catherine was ready to offer, but he was also warm and attentive in ways that made her feel valued and cared for. He brought her coffee in the morning before she was fully awake. He asked her opinion on decisions about the ranch, and he listened carefully when she talked about her ideas for improving the household efficiency. They fell into an easy partnership, with Catherine taking over the cooking and household management while Samuel handled the outside work. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, and Samuel would read aloud from one of the few books he owned while Catherine worked on mending or knitting. It was a comfortable domesticity, and Catherine found herself looking forward to each day, to the quiet moments of companionship that punctuated the hard work. Samuel kept his promise to teach her to ride, and Catherine discovered that, while she was not a natural horsewoman, she enjoyed being on Belle's back, seeing the property from this new perspective. Samuel was a patient teacher, never laughing at her mistakes or making her feel inadequate, and by the end of the first week, she could manage a slow walk around the immediate area of the house. "You are doing well," Samuel told her after one such lesson, helping her down from Belle's back. His hands lingered at her waist, and Catherine found herself leaning into his touch, craving the warmth and solidity of him. "By spring, you will be riding well enough to come check the far pastures with me." "I would like that," Catherine said softly, looking up into his face. He was so close she could see the individual whiskers of his beard, could feel the warmth of his breath on her face. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, but instead he stepped back, putting space between them with what looked like considerable effort. "The preacher will be here tomorrow," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Are you having second thoughts?" "No," Catherine said, and she meant it. "Are you?" "Not even a little bit." The intensity in his eyes made her pulse quicken. "I cannot wait to make you my wife in truth, Catherine. These past 11 days have been both wonderful and torturous, having you so close but not truly mine." The honesty of the admission made Catherine's breath catch. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "Tomorrow everything changes." The wedding was a simple affair, held in the main room of the house with only a handful of witnesses from town. Mrs. Patterson came, Herbert Winston's sister who had first asked Samuel to meet Catherine at the train. There was also the town doctor and his wife, and a couple who ran the general store. The circuit preacher, a weathered man named Reverend Thomas, performed the ceremony with efficient solemnity. Catherine wore a dress that had belonged to Samuel's mother, a dark blue wool that she had carefully altered to fit. Someone had found a small bouquet of dried flowers, and Catherine clutched it in her shaking hands as she stood beside Samuel and repeated the vows that would bind them together. Samuel's voice was steady and strong as he promised to love and cherish her, and when he slid a simple gold band onto her finger, Catherine felt tears pricking at her eyes. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Thomas announced, and Samuel turned to Catherine with an expression that made her heart race. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing gently across her cheekbone, and then he was kissing her with a tenderness that took her breath away. It was her first real kiss, and it was nothing like she had imagined. It was warm and soft and full of promise, and when they finally parted, Catherine felt as though something fundamental had shifted inside her. The small gathering stayed for a simple meal that Catherine and Mrs. Patterson had prepared together, and then one by one the guests departed, leaving Catherine and Samuel alone in the house that was now legally hers as well as his. The sun was setting, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold, and Catherine stood at the window watching it while Samuel banked the fire for the night. "Are you frightened?" he asked softly, coming to stand behind her. His hand settled on her shoulders, warm and reassuring through the fabric of her dress. "A little," Catherine admitted. "But not of you, more of the unknown of whether I will be good at this, at being a wife." Samuel turned her to face him, his hand sliding down to take hers. "We will figure it out together," he said. "Neither of us has done this before, so we are both learning. And I meant what I said in my vows, Catherine. I will love you and cherish you for as long as I live. You are my wife now, and I will spend every day trying to deserve that gift." He led her upstairs to the larger bedroom, which had been transformed during the day while they were busy with the wedding preparations. Someone, probably Mrs. Patterson, had made up the bed with fresh linens and added small touches that made the space feel more welcoming. A fire burned in the little stove, and candles flickered on the dresser, casting warm shadows on the walls. Samuel closed the door behind them, and for a moment they simply stood there, looking at each other in the soft light. Then he stepped forward and very gently began to remove the pins from Catherine's hair, letting it fall in dark waves around her shoulders. His fingers were careful, reverent almost, as though she were something precious that might break if handled too roughly. "You are so beautiful," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I have thought that since the moment I saw you standing on that platform, looking lost and brave at the same time." Catherine reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "I was so frightened that day. Everything I had planned for had fallen apart, and I did not know what I was going to do. And then you were there, and you offered me shelter and warmth and a future I had not dared to hope for." "I am glad I was there," Samuel said. "I cannot imagine what would have happened if you had been left alone, if I had not met that train. The thought of you cold and frightened, and without anywhere to turn, makes me want to go back and change everything, to make sure you never felt that way." "You did change everything," Catherine said. "You gave me a home and a purpose, and now you have given me your name and your promise to keep me warm forever. I know I said I would not expect romance from this arrangement, but Samuel, I think I am already falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, and Catherine held her breath, wondering if she had said too much too soon. But then Samuel was pulling her close, holding her against his chest so tightly she could hear the rapid beating of his heart. "Good," he said fiercely. "Because I have been falling in love with you since you first looked up at me with those brave, scared eyes and agreed to get into a wagon with a complete stranger. I did not expect this, Catherine. I thought we would have a practical marriage, a partnership based on mutual need. But every day I spend with you makes me realize how wrong I was. This is so much more than I ever hoped for." He kissed her again, and this time there was more heat in it, more promise. Catherine responded instinctively, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck, her body pressing against his. She could feel the strength of him, the barely leashed passion that he was holding in check out of consideration for her inexperience. But she did not want him to hold back, not tonight, not when they were finally truly husband and wife. "Samuel," she whispered against his lips, "I am your wife now. You do not have to be quite so gentle with me." He groaned, a sound that came from deep in his chest, and then he was kissing her with more urgency, his hands moving over her body in ways that made her shiver with something that had nothing to do with cold. He undressed her slowly, reverently, and she did the same for him, until they were both bare in the flickering candlelight. Then he lifted her and carried her to the bed, laying her down on the soft quilts with a care that made her throat tight with emotion. What followed was both awkward and beautiful, a fumbling exploration that spoke more of genuine affection than practiced skill. Samuel was patient and attentive, constantly asking if she was all right, if anything hurt, if she wanted him to stop. Catherine had been told that the marriage bed was something to be endured rather than enjoyed, but she found that with Samuel it was different. There was pain, yes, but there was also pleasure and closeness, and a sense of connection that went beyond the merely physical. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the quilts, Catherine's head resting on Samuel's chest while his fingers traced idle patterns on her bare shoulder. The room was warm from the stove and their shared body heat, and Catherine felt more content than she could ever remember feeling. "Are you all right?" Samuel asked softly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "More than all right," Catherine assured him. "I am happy, Samuel, truly happy. So am I." His arms tightened around her. "You are mine now, Catherine Wright, and I will keep you warm forever, just as I promised." The winter passed in a blur of work and growing intimacy. Catherine threw herself into managing the household, finding satisfaction in creating order and comfort in their small domain. She proved to be an excellent cook, and Samuel gained weight under her care, losing the gaunt look that spoke of too many solitary meals of beans and bacon. She took over the ranch accounts, discovering that she had a head for numbers and a talent for finding ways to stretch their resources further. But more than the practical partnership they had agreed to, Catherine and Samuel built something deeper. They talked for hours in the evenings, sharing their hopes and fears and dreams for the future. Samuel told her about his plans to expand the herd, to add more acres to the ranch and maybe hire permanent help. Catherine shared her dream of having a real garden, of maybe getting some chickens in the spring, of eventually having a piano, though she knew that was probably an impossible luxury. "Not impossible," Samuel said when she mentioned it. "Maybe not this year or next, but someday. I want to give you everything you want, Catherine." Their physical relationship deepened as well, the awkwardness of the wedding night giving way to a passionate connection that surprised them both. Samuel was a generous and attentive lover, and Catherine discovered that she enjoyed their intimate moments far more than she had been led to believe was proper for a lady. They would fall asleep wrapped around each other and wake the same way, and Catherine treasured the quiet mornings when they could linger in bed before the demands of the ranch pulled Samuel away. Spring came late but sudden, the snow melting in rushing torrents that swelled the creek and turned the ground to mud. The cattle grew restless, eager for fresh grass, and Samuel worked from before dawn until after dark managing the chaos of calving season. Catherine helped where she could, learning to bottle feed orphaned calves and assist with difficult births. It was exhausting, often heartbreaking work, but there was satisfaction in it too, in seeing the herd grow and knowing they were building something together. In May, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but had not wanted to say anything until she was certain. When she finally told Samuel, he lifted her off her feet and spun her around the kitchen, laughing with pure joy. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Catherine asked, though she could see the answer written all over his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Samuel said, setting her down carefully as though she might break. "You have given me everything, Catherine. A home, a partnership, love, and now this. I am the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Catherine bloomed under Samuel's attentive care. He became ridiculously overprotective, insisting she rest more and do less heavy work, though Catherine ignored most of his fussing. She felt strong and capable, more alive than she had ever felt before, and she was determined to pull her weight on the ranch even as her belly grew. In the late summer, Samuel hired 2 young men to help with the ranch work, freeing him up to spend more time with Catherine as her due date approached. The doctor from town came out every few weeks to check on her, and Mrs. Patterson promised to come stay when the time came, to help with the delivery and the first difficult days after. The baby came in early October, born during a mild afternoon with the window open to let in the autumn breeze. It was a boy, strong and healthy with a shock of dark hair and his father's gray eyes. They named him James after Samuel's father, and Samuel held his son with such tenderness that Catherine felt tears streaming down her face. "He is perfect," Samuel whispered, staring down at the tiny face. "Catherine, he is absolutely perfect. We made him," Catherine said, still awed by this fact. "We made this beautiful little person together." Samuel carried James to the window, holding him up to see the ranch spread out below. "This is your home, son," he said softly. "Someday, all of this will be yours. Your mother and I built this together, and we will teach you to value it and care for it and pass it on to your own children someday." Watching them silhouetted against the window, Catherine felt her heart swell with love so intense it was almost painful. This man who had promised to keep her warm forever had given her so much more than shelter from the cold. He had given her a home, a purpose, a family, and a love that grew deeper with each passing day. The first year of James's life was a whirlwind of sleepless nights and new challenges, but Samuel and Catherine faced them together as they did everything else. Samuel proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with a colicky baby in the middle of the night so Catherine could get some rest, changing dirty diapers without complaint, and spending hours just staring at his son with wonder on his face. As James grew from an infant to a toddler, Catherine discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the baby was a girl, born in the spring with her mother's dark hair and delicate features. They named her Anna, and Samuel was just as smitten with his daughter as he had been with his son. The ranch prospered under their joint management. The herd grew larger, and Samuel was able to add more land, fulfilling the dreams his parents had held when they first came west. Catherine's garden flourished, providing vegetables for their table and surplus to sell in town. They built a chicken coop, and Catherine took pride in her flock of laying hens. The house itself grew too, with Samuel adding 2 more bedrooms to accommodate their growing family. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Samuel surprised Catherine with a piano, hauled all the way from Helena at considerable expense and effort. Catherine cried when she saw it, overcome by the fact that he had remembered her casually mentioned dream from years before. "You said you wanted one," Samuel said, looking pleased by her reaction. "I have been saving for it since that first winter. You deserve to have beautiful things, Catherine, things that make you happy." "You make me happy," Catherine said, throwing her arms around him. "Everything else is just bonus." The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. More children came, another boy and then twin girls, until the house rang with the sound of young voices and running feet. The ranch continued to prosper, and Samuel and Catherine became pillars of the small community, known for their hard work and generous hearts. Catherine never forgot that first night she had stepped off the train into the snow, frightened and alone, wondering what her future held. She had been so certain her life was over, that she had made a terrible mistake in coming west. But standing on the porch of the house she shared with Samuel, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold while their children played in the yard, Catherine knew that stepping off that train had been the best decision she had ever made. Samuel came up behind her, sliding his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. At 41, he was broader and more weathered than the young man who had met her at the station, but his eyes still held the same warmth they had shown that first night. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "About how lucky I am," Catherine said, leaning into his embrace. "About how different my life could have been if you had not been there that day." "I was thinking the same thing," Samuel admitted. "That train brought me everything I ever wanted, even though I did not know it at the time. You stepped off into the snow, and I promised to keep you warm forever. I had no idea I was really promising to fill my life with warmth and light and more love than I ever thought possible." Catherine turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to touch his face. Even after all these years, he still made her heart race when he looked at her like that, with love and desire and deep affection all mixed together. "You kept your promise, Samuel Wright. You have kept me warm through every winter and every storm, just like you said you would. But you gave me so much more than that. You gave me a home and a family and a love I never dreamed I could have." "And you gave me the same," Samuel said, lowering his head to kiss her. "Every day with you has been a gift, Catherine. Every single day." As the sun set over the Montana mountains and their children's laughter filled the air, Catherine and Samuel stood wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for the cold December day that had brought them together and the warmth they had built in all the years since. The mail-order bride who had stepped off the train into the snow had found more than just shelter from the storm. She had found home and family and a love that would last forever. The years continued to flow like the creek that ran through their property, sometimes rushing with the chaos of spring melt, sometimes moving slow and steady through the heat of summer. James grew into a serious young man who shared his father's passion for ranching, already helping with the cattle by the time he was 12. Anna proved to have her mother's head for numbers and spent hours helping with the ranch accounts, her tongue poking out in concentration as she carefully recorded each transaction. The younger children, Matthew and the twins Sarah and Elizabeth, added their own personalities to the household. Matthew was the dreamer of the family, always with his nose in a book when he could get away with it, though Samuel made sure he learned ranch work too. The twins were inseparable and utterly fearless, climbing trees and racing their horses with abandon that made Catherine's heart stop on a regular basis. As the children grew older and more capable, Catherine found herself with more time to focus on other projects. She started a small school in Hecla, teaching the ranch children and those from surrounding properties who otherwise would have had no education. Samuel built her a small schoolhouse on the edge of town, and Catherine found deep satisfaction in passing on the love of learning her own father had instilled in her. The ranch itself became one of the most successful in the region. Samuel's careful breeding program produced cattle that were hardier and brought better prices at market. He gained a reputation as a fair dealer and a knowledgeable stockman, and other ranchers began coming to him for advice. Together, Samuel and Catherine became wealthy by local standards, though they never forgot the precarious position they had both been in when they first met. They used their success to help others when they could. When drought hit several neighboring ranches hard, Samuel extended credit and grazing rights without hesitation. When families fell on hard times, Catherine made sure there were anonymous gifts of food and clothing that appeared on doorsteps. They never spoke of their charity, seeing it simply as the right thing to do, a way of paying forward the kindness that had been shown to them. On their 10th anniversary, they took a trip together, leaving the children in the care of Samuel's hired foreman and his wife. They rode into the mountains, just the two of them, camping under the stars like newlyweds. Lying in Samuel's arms under a blanket of stars more brilliant than anything Catherine had ever imagined in her Philadelphia days, she felt completely at peace. "You ever regret it?" Samuel asked her in the darkness, his voice soft. "Coming west, marrying a stranger, giving up everything you knew?" "Never," Catherine said without hesitation. "My life before you was small and constrained. I did not even realize how small until I came here and saw how big the world could be. You gave me space to grow, Samuel. You gave me room to become more than I ever could have been in Philadelphia." "You gave me the same," Samuel said, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "I was half alive before you came, just going through the motions of living. You brought color and warmth and purpose to everything. You made me whole." They made love under the stars that night, and Catherine thought about how far they had come from that awkward wedding night 10 years before. They knew each other now in ways that went far beyond the physical, understood each other's rhythms and needs without having to speak. This was what a true partnership looked like, she thought. This deep knowing, this complete trust, this love that had grown deeper and stronger with each passing year. More years passed, bringing both joy and sorrow as life always did. Samuel's hired foreman retired, and James stepped into his role despite being barely 20, proving himself more than capable of managing the day-to-day operations. Anna married a schoolteacher from Helena, a kind young man who shared her love of books and learning. The wedding was held at the ranch, with half the county in attendance, and Catherine cried watching her daughter pledge her life to someone she clearly loved. Matthew surprised everyone by announcing he wanted to go east for college. Samuel was initially resistant, wanting all his children close, but Catherine convinced him to let their son follow his dreams. "We came west because we had to," she reminded him. "He should have the choice to go east if that is what he wants, and he will come back, Samuel. This place is in his blood." She was right. Matthew returned after 4 years with a degree and a head full of new ideas about agriculture and land management. He brought home a bride, too, a quiet girl from Ohio who reminded Catherine so much of Samuel's mother that it made her heart ache. They built a house on the far side of the property, and Matthew proved to be invaluable in expanding the ranch's operations. The twins refused to settle down, much to their parents' consternation. Sarah became known as one of the best horse trainers in the territory, while Elizabeth took over the medical practice in Hecla after marrying the doctor who had delivered James all those years ago. Both remained fiercely independent, and Catherine took pride in their strength even as she worried about them. Time moved on, as it always did. Catherine's dark hair turned silver, and Samuel's face became even more lined and weathered. They moved slower than they once had, their joints stiff on cold mornings, but the connection between them remained as strong as ever. They still spent their evenings by the fire, still reached for each other in the night, still found joy in the simple act of being together. They became grandparents, and then great-grandparents, the house filling with multiple generations during holidays and celebrations. The ranch continued to prosper under James's management, and Catherine's school became a permanent fixture in Hecla, with Anna's daughter eventually taking over as teacher. On their 40th anniversary, Samuel was too stiff to climb the stairs easily, and Catherine's eyesight had faded to the point where she could no longer read her beloved books. But they sat together on the porch, wrapped in quilts against the autumn chill, watching the sun set over the mountains that had witnessed their entire life together. 40 years, Catherine said softly. 40 years since I stepped off that train into the snow. Best decision I ever made, going to meet that train, Samuel said, his hand finding hers under the quilts. His fingers were gnarled with arthritis, but his grip was still strong. Best thing that ever happened to me was seeing you standing there, looking lost and brave." "You promised to keep me warm forever," Catherine reminded him, a smile in her voice. "And have I?" Samuel asked. "Every single day," Catherine assured him. "Through 40 winters and 40 summers, through good times and hard times, you have kept me warm and safe and loved. You gave me everything I never knew I needed." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and the first stars appeared. Around them, the ranch settled into evening quiet, 3 generations of their family sleeping under various roofs across the property. It was a legacy built on a chance meeting in a snowstorm, on a promise made and kept, on love that had grown from practical beginnings into something deep and enduring. Samuel died peacefully in his sleep a year later, at the age of 72. He simply did not wake up one morning, slipping away so quietly that Catherine did not realize he was gone until she reached for him and found his hand cold. The loss was devastating, a pain so sharp and deep that Catherine thought she might die from it. After 41 years of waking up beside him, of sharing every joy and sorrow, of being partners in all things, the absence of him was a physical ache. The entire county turned out for his funeral, testament to the respect and affection Samuel had earned over his lifetime. James delivered the eulogy, speaking of his father's integrity, his dedication to family, and his deep love for the woman he had met on a snowy platform 41 years before. Catherine sat in the front row, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and felt utterly alone despite the crowd. The weeks after Samuel's death were dark ones. Catherine moved through them in a haze, going through the motions of living but feeling hollow inside. Anna came to stay with her, and the presence of her daughter was a comfort, but nothing could fill the Samuel-shaped hole in Catherine's heart. One morning, Catherine woke before dawn and found herself standing at the window of the bedroom she had shared with Samuel, looking out at the mountains just beginning to emerge from darkness. She could not remember walking there, but she stood wrapped in one of Samuel's old coats, breathing in the faint scent of him that still clung to the fabric. And suddenly, she could hear his voice as clearly as if he were standing beside her. "I will keep you warm forever," he had promised that first night, and Catherine realized with a start that he still was. The warmth she felt was not just from his coat or from memories, but from the life they had built together, the family they had created, the love that endured even beyond death. Samuel had kept her warm for 41 years, and he would continue to keep her warm for however many years she had left. She carried him with her in everything she did, in the ranch he had built, in the children they had raised, in the thousands of small moments and memories that made up a life shared. Catherine lived another 5 years after Samuel's death, years filled with the love and support of her large family. She continued to teach at the school until she was too frail, and she spent her final years surrounded by great-grandchildren who sat at her feet and begged for stories about the old days. She died on a cold December evening, exactly 46 years after she had first stepped off that train into the snow. The family was gathered around her bed in the house she had shared with Samuel, and as she took her last breath, she could have sworn she saw him standing at the foot of the bed, young and strong as he had been that first night, reaching out his hand to her, ready to come home. He seemed to ask, and Catherine smiled as she reached for him. They buried her beside Samuel on a hill overlooking the ranch, the mountains rising purple and gold in the distance. The headstone was simple, listing her name and dates and one line that James had chosen: "Beloved wife, mother, and teacher. She found warmth in the cold and built a legacy of love." The ranch continued for generations, always staying in the right family, always carrying the legacy of the mail-order bride who had stepped off a train into snow and the cowboy who had promised to keep her warm forever. Their love story became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. A reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from taking a chance on the unknown, from saying yes to possibility, even when it is scary, from building something beautiful out of practical beginnings. And on cold winter nights, when the snow fell thick and the wind howled around the buildings, those who lived on the ranch sometimes felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fires burning in the grates. It was the warmth of love that endured beyond death, of promises kept, of a legacy built on partnership and affection, and the courage to choose hope over fear. The mail-order bride and her cowboy had found each other in a snowstorm, and together they had created light and warmth that lasted for generations. A beacon of love in the wild Montana landscape they had both called home.